Whether you be Xeno scum, heretic filth, or your average follower of the God Emperor, I welcome you all to Warhammer 40k month. However, some of you may be asking, what is Warhammer 40k? Which is a terrific question, because Warhammer 40k originated as a tabletop strategy game in 1987 that takes place in probably the most metal science fantasy universe I have discovered. Its illustrations alone can pass for heavy metal album covers, and it is glorious. Not to worry, however, future initiates, there is more than one way to dive into the Warhammer 40k universe, and thank the God Emperor that there is too. While I'm sure that the tabletop game is extremely fun, the financial barrier to entry is astronomically high, which is why this month on The Overlook, we'll be looking at a game and its expansions that personally served as my gateway into this mad universe that we know as Warhammer 40k. Today, under our observation, Dawn of War. Warhammer 40k had some notable titles under its belt, the main one being Space Hulk, but even that one didn't fully encompass what Warhammer was all about. Dawn of War was the first game to truly give justice to the universe that so many were fond of, and I'm willing to bet that I wasn't the only one indoctrinated into the Warhammer fandom through this game. It wasn't just a commercial success, it was an accessible gateway into a franchise unlike any other that inspired much of today's gaming. In fact, if it wasn't for Warhammer 40k, StarCraft, the RTS series made by Blizzard, would not exist. It's not even arguable, StarCraft, an esport juggernaut, would not exist without Warhammer. That, however, is a topic for another time. Dawn of War is a real-time strategy game developed by Relic Games, released in 2004. It was unique then, and it's still unique now. Its troop reinforcement system, use of strategic locations, and resource gathering are all widely different from any other RTS game. As I said earlier, no other game bearing the Warhammer 40k moniker has truly realized the spirit of the franchise until Dawn of War, and I meant it. Combat feels brutal, bloody, and fast-paced. Its game mechanics encourage you to be aggressive as possible, for any moment of hesitation will quickly send you spiraling towards defeat. Its sound, voice acting, presentation, and gameplay proudly and expertly uses the Warhammer license to full effect. Though, while all this is absolutely fantastic, just because a game does a franchise justice with a few innovations does not mean it's a good game. So, is it? Is it a game worth your time? Well, yeah, it is. It isn't just a good game. It's a great game. Here's why. The game has 4 playable factions: the Space Marines, the Orcs, the Eldar, and Chaos, all of which play similarly, yet widely different from one another. The Space Marines primarily use bulky infantry and heavy firepower that can relatively keep morale high, morale being a feature I will cover in a bit. The Orcs, yes, that's Orcs with a K, rely mostly on overwhelming numbers and hardy troops, all the while having to deal with the third unique resource to keep track of. The Eldar, being the glass cannons of the 4 factions, rely on both melee and range to take down their opponents, with access to some rather powerful vehicles in late game. They also possess a strong commander unit and the ability to actually teleport their own buildings to another location. Chaos is a lot like the Space Marines, though with enough differences to make their playstyle dissonant from everyone else. Their workers have the ability to produce buildings much faster at the expense of their health, and they can summon some decent units mid-game anywhere in the map, so as long as you have line of sight. Of course, I am glossing over many of the capabilities that each faction has, but that is further testament to show how different each faction is played. The goals, however, are still the same: despite what faction you choose to play as, and this is where the game differs from other real-time strategy games. The first method you can use to win in matches against the AI or other human opponents is of course the complete annihilation of either side. The other methods of victory, however, are a bit different. There are two main resources in the game, requisition points and power points. No, not that PowerPoint. In most RTSs, resources are gained through assigning workers to mining nodes. Those workers would then travel back and forth to the node in your HQ, slowly giving you resources needed to build troops, buildings, and obtain upgrades. This is not how Dawn of War does things. Instead, Dawn of War uses a more passive means of gaining resources through the acquisition of strategic points. Strategic points are locations scattered across the various maps that you need to capture. The more strategic points you hold, the more requisition points you gain per second. Power is achieved through the same process, though you only need to build the faction's power generators instead of capturing points. I mention this now because a method of victory is to maintain control over the majority of strategic points for a set amount of time. Even without this victory condition, the fact that you gain resources faster by owning more strategic points encourages the player to act and move aggressively. You can't just sit in your base turtling up while you amass an attack force. Such a method is a recipe to get steamrolled. The other method of victory requires you to control a variant of the strategic point known as a critical location. Holding all critical locations, which are usually about 1 to 3 of them at any given time, for roughly 5 or so minutes will win you the game. The difference, however, is that critical locations cannot be reinforced like normal strategic points. Each faction has a building called a listening post that they can build over strategic points to reinforce that location, forcing enemies to destroy the building before they can capture that point. Furthermore, listening points can be upgraded with turrets to provide a stronger offensive counter, and it creates an area of control in which you construct buildings. Critical locations do not have these features, and therefore much easier to take. But because there are so few of them and they play a part in victory conditions, the game manipulates full-scale battles to happen within these isolated locations, creating quite the intense game of King of the Hill.
6 minutes until take and hold victory.
Victory countdown has begun.
Mechanically speaking, everything is designed to encourage aggressive play, making the game purely centered around the combat, creating almost cinematic-like sequences of brutal gunfights and carnage, all of which can be viewed with a fully 3D-enabled camera, though to be honest, it is extremely easy to forget about this feature as the fights can become very involved. Many of the units within the game, such as the Assault Marines, have special abilities that you can use to gain advantage over your opponents. The aforementioned Assault Marines have the jump ability that can have them fly from one location to the next, which is excellent for outmaneuvering your foes. You can also upgrade your regular Space Marines to throw grenades to scatter some enemy units and damage their morale. Morale plays a huge part in this game. It's a separate bar under your health, and it's within your best interest to keep morale as high as possible. While morale is up, your units act as a cohesive whole, and hold up well under fire, keeping damage output high and damage to your overall health to a minimum. Take a grenade or a missile to the face, however, your morale is broken, and your squad will more than likely scatter, and your overall fighting capability for that particular squad is severely diminished. Morale, however, is rechargeable, so if you can get your units out of danger, the morale will be restored. Another thing to keep your eye on in the midst of battle is the number of units within your squads. Squads of units operate under 1 health bar, and units will die should that bar start to decline. However, the game strongly recommends you use the reinforcement system. By clicking on a plus icon beside your squad's character portrait, you can add more units to your squad until you reach the maximum allowed amount. This will increase the health points and morale of the squad. For as long as there is just 1 remaining unit in the squad, you can continue to reinforce your squad instead of having to build an entirely new one. This makes micromanaging your armies fairly important, as in the context of the game, units are not necessarily cheap to build, especially in early game. You can further upgrade your squad by assigning different weapons by the squad's portrait. Each weapon has a particular speciality. For example, with a fully upgraded armory, a Space Marine squad can carry up to a total of 4 weapons. Heavy bolters can mow down enemy infantry fairly easily, while missile launchers are adept at taking out enemy vehicles. This makes assigning weapons to your squads an important aspect of the game, as you need to build your squad to fit the current situation. I know this might sound like a lot to take in. After all, there are several unique mechanics in Dawn of War that are just not prevalent in other real-time strategy games. However, the game does its best to steadily introduce you to these mechanics through its tutorial and its main campaign. The tutorial, while admittedly boring, goes through its basic conventions step by step to ensure the player familiarizes itself with the game. I heard some people suggest that new players should jump straight into the campaign, but I suggest the opposite as there are a few things that the campaign does not cover. I do hesitate in suggesting this though, since nothing really exciting happens within the tutorial itself, and the narrator sounds like he is completely and utterly disinterested in what he is doing.
Welcome to the Dawn of War tutorial. By listening to me and reading the text that appears in this message box, you will learn how to play a skirmish game.
What is your
To
will?
select a unit or structure,
We
simply
all
click
do
on it with
this.
the left mouse button. Go to your base and select the stronghold. Congratulations! You have just learned how to select units and structures in the game.
But there are critical pieces of information within the tutorial that are necessary to take full advantage of the game. Luckily, the campaign picks up a lot of the slack by reinforcing the information that you already know with introducing concepts such as upgrade buildings and troop special abilities. Regarding the campaign, I admit I'm a bit mixed on it. For the most part, it's a good campaign. It has its issues. Despite those issues, however, if you haven't been acquainted yet with the world of Warhammer 40k, I strongly recommend picking up this game for the campaign, mainly due to the fact that its story is an excellent introduction to the lore of Warhammer. It served as my introduction, and I think it would serve others as well as a gateway. Part of the reason why it's a good introduction, in my opinion, is because the Space Marines you play are known as the Blood Ravens, led by Captain Gabriel Angelos. The Blood Ravens are a completely new chapter of the Space Marines faction, made solely for the Dawn of War games. They have no prior history and agenda save for their prime directive, the destruction of all heretics and Xenos that threaten the Imperium of Man. While this does make them a bit generic, you need no special information to know about what these Space Marines are all about. The story is presented simply and clearly, given all the information you need to the player through its story, presentation, and sound design.
My lord, I have taken the liberty of stationing my Imperial Guard around the key facilities, including the spaceport and power plant.
Your initiative is admirable, Colonel, but I need you to pull your men back to this location where they can concentrate their defense.
But if we abandon the spaceport...
We cannot hold the spaceport, Colonel. We have to maximize our defense in one location to assure victory. Do not mistake the Orcs' simple manner for stupidity. They are far more cunning than they may seem. Now go.
Though veterans of the franchise, you might be a bit disappointed in the simplicity of the campaign story. Some things are left unexplained that the game would assume that you already know, but it isn't enough to deter anyone from the plot. The narrative is as follows. The Space Marine chapter, known as the Blood Ravens, have been called to the planet of Tartarus to start up a large orc incursion. The chapter is led by Captain Gabriel Angelos, who just recently got back from ordering the extermination of his homeworld's entire populace, due to the forces of Chaos taking strong root there. Chaos being the big bad enemy of the franchise. Well, I can't really say that. The Tyranids and the Necrons are some pretty stiff competition. Actually, fuck it. Fuck it. Everybody's a douchebag, even the Space Marines. It's an entire shitfest of cosmic proportions. Everyone basically wants to kill everybody. The end. That's Warhammer 40k in a nutshell. But, still reeling over his incredibly tough decision to do so, he and his friend, the librarian Isidore... No, not that kind of librarian. These librarians are more like space wizards? They're fucking Jedi, okay? Set off to wage war against the orcs. From there, the plot gets both the Eldar and Chaos involved, with each faction basically racing to obtain an ancient artifact that wields incredible power. It's a story that's incredibly character-driven, mainly focusing on Gabriel, Isidore, and the Chaos Sorcerer Sindri. While the in-game cutscenes are quite honestly leave much to be desired, the voice acting pretty much hits everything right out of the park. In fact, it's not just the voice acting, it's the entirety of the game's sound design. Everything just sounds so distinctly Warhammer. Well, maybe except for the bolter fire. They just sound like everyday machine guns. Luckily that was fixed in Space Marine. From the gyrating gears of the various vehicles, the hums of the jetpacks, the many intense explosions of artillery fire, you can believe that your troops down there, they're going through hell, and you're putting them through it. but by far the best aspects of this game's sound is the voice work. From Gabriel's gruff, fierce, and somber voice.
I am Captain Gabriel Angelos of the Blood Ravens 3rd Company. Status.
My lord, forgive me. We have done all we can to stop the orcs, but we have failed. My men's lives are yours.
You stood your ground in the face of the Emperor's foes. You've done your duty. If your men have failed you, I will leave their judgment in your hands.
To the orc boss's hilarious Cockney accents juxtaposed with broken English, to Cindery's snake-like voice as smooth as butter dialogue.
Everything is ready, boss. Damn Humies is in for a good stomping. This is gonna be the best fight of their miserable lives. Just make sure it's the last fight of their lives. I don't take orders from you, Humie. We've held up our side of the bargain, have we not? You wanted a new planet to wage war on, and we have given it to you. You wanted to face the Imperium's greatest warriors, the Space Marines. They are here. We've even provided you with weapons and Imperial tanks to use on the battlefield. And all we ask in return is that you keep the Imperials distracted from our operations here. You've kept your word, but that still don't mean you can order the orcs around. My apologies. We've delivered the last of the weaponry. They're in the hands of your servants. We'll take our leave now. I respectfully request that you keep the Marines busy for as long as you can. We'll keep them more than busy. We'll keep them dead.
Everything is realized. Your Space Marines constantly shout praises to the God Emperor of Man, the Orc constantly grunt and chant, and Chaos sounds like a league of maniacs that's recently broken out of an insane asylum. Everything here is top-notch, and I could not praise it enough. Unfortunately, I cannot give the same enthusiasm to the campaign's layout. There are 11 missions in all, and while that it is a decent length, most of the missions amount to the same thing. They are extermination missions for the most part, and while they do serve their purpose in introducing the players to all new buildings and unit mechanics, it does not make for an interesting playthrough. It could have been done better with some more varied mission types. I also have an issue with the campaign, narratively speaking. Speaking in spoiler-free terms, there is a plot element within the campaign in which one of the antagonists is trying to manipulate a character to do his bidding. Toward the end of the story, said character gives in to the temptation and betrays the protagonist. While I'm sure some will disagree, I felt that his plot thread wasn't really realized. There seemed to be no good reason for the betrayal other than, "I want more power," which in the context of the backstory that you learn about this character feels contrived and forced. Likewise, a powerful weapon pops up at the end of the story out of nowhere that is given to the main protagonist that simply feels like it's there for convenience reasons. I know these things seem nitpicky, but I really care about the narrative in these things, and issues like random Deus Ex Machina display itself more prominently to me than others. Or rather, they just bother me more than others. I'm not gonna harp too much on this either, but I really wish that the game included campaigns for the Orcs, Eldar, and Chaos. Mainly for some more lore, but also to ease newer players into the mechanics of those factions, just as the main campaign did with the Space Marines. The Orcs, for example, use a third resource called WA, which is produced by building Orc variants of turrets, known as WA banners. This resource is essential to building up the Orc horde to get those overwhelming numbers that you would usually associate them with. This, however, is just a personal critique that I do not believe affects the quality of the game. Presentation-wise, we already discussed its awesome sound design, but how does it hold up graphically? For a game made in 2004, it still sure does look good. That's mainly in due part to the excellent particle effects and its use of color. It's not cel-shaded, but it holds up well in the regard to how Warcraft 3 holds up well. Due to its cartoony and exaggerated nature, everything still looks fairly decent. It's all dated, mind you, but it isn't ugly in the slightest. It still looks awesome when a Space Marine dreadnought smashes an orc into a ground like he's playing whack-a-mole, With its excellent use of blood and its persistent bodies, you can still turn your Warhammer landscape into a field of carnage. Aesthetically, you will get no complaints from me here. How is the multiplayer, however? Well, 13 people. 13 people within all the multiplayer channels of the base game. That's how many I found. I suppose you really can't call it dead. More like akin to a 112-year-old man on life support. Fairly sure most of them are probably playing in one of the later expansions. As you're probably guessing, I couldn't get into a match. Play this one for the campaign, folks. You'll find no multiplayer here. The game also sports a feature where you can literally change the color layout of your armies, giving it a nice personal touch. I myself did not really feel the need to use this feature, though I know that for many Warhammer vets coming into this game, it was a much welcome addition. The appeal of the tabletop strategy game mostly comes in the capability to paint your armies, adding a personal touch to your units. I'd probably feel more inclined to use this if I could get into multiplayer, but you can still use this in conjunction with regular skirmish modes if you so please. One final point before we wrap things up. If you do plan on getting this game off of Steam, here's a tip. Note that the game does not natively support widescreen resolutions. However, you can force the game into widescreen aspect ratios by utilizing a hex editor to manipulate the code within the program. I found it to be a much better experience to play the game this way in its expansion Winter Assault. The fix will generally take up about 10 to 15 minutes of your time, but I believe it to be well worth it. Luckily, its later expansions, namely Dark Crusade and Soulstorm, support widescreen natively, so it's not necessary to implement the fix. Overall, it's hard to find a game that just so perfectly captures the essence of Warhammer 40k, and Dawn of War nails it, all the while being an extremely solid and engaging real-time strategy game to boot. There are problems, of course. Mission variety is almost non-existent. Some plot elements annoy me, and as far as factions go, the Eldar seem a bit underpowered. They don't seem to have any kind of viable anti-vehicle options for quite some time, and it's easy to get steamrolled by other factions. Also, it's probably just me, but the Space Marines seem a tad bit stronger than everyone else, mainly due to the versatility of their weapon variety. I'm probably just being a scrub though, so feel free to type your retorts in the comments section. You filthy Xeno scum. Oh! Did I mention this game has mechs? Because this game has mechs. Mechs make everything 5 times better. It's like a law, a rule of nature, or something. 10 out of 10 Game of the Year. Well, you conglomeration of heretical bile, that is the end of today's episode. Fret not, however, for the God Emperor himself has tasked me to provide you with 3 more episodes this month. Next week, we tackle an expansion to Dawn of War that has fans a bit divided. Luckily, it's still winter this time of year, because next week, things are about to get cold.